So, after making Spring Boy and Mikey Myers, I needed one more to finish the masked villain trio. Thankfully, one of my all-time favorite movies, The Black Phone, came out this year, and it of course had the best candidate to complete the trio. That's right, Ethan the Grabber Hawk himself was my next cosplay, but you probably knew that from the thumbnail already. So spoilers. So when it came to this cosplay, I kind of cheated a little bit. Please don't hate me. But I went out and I bought a plain white mask at my local Party City. I'm not really sure what they call this mask. I just refer to it as the bootleg Michael Myers mask. But I envisioned this to be the base, but it looked nothing like the mask. So I had to modify it. The first modification I did was to cut the mask in half, just like it is in the movie. I took my Dremel and used the saw blade and I cut it off camera. I also shaped the eyes and cut out his bottom lip. Once it was all done, I thought it started to look like him, which I took as a good sign. Now it was on to the good stuff, which is the EVA foam. I started with the top part since it would be the easiest to do, which kind of made him look like Batman at first, which I wasn't going for, so I cut the excess off and applied more EVA foam using the old reliable hot glue gun. With his forehead, it's a bit curved towards the top, which I wanted to replicate as best as I could, so I added shape by gluing on more pieces to the top. Once all the foundation pieces were glued on, I covered it all with one big piece, putting the cherry on top. And I did the same to the sides, covering them up as well. I was a bit nervous using hot glue on the mask since I thought it would melt the plastic, which it kind of did, but not too much thankfully. However, it did get a bunch of hot glue on my hands. Moving on, I covered the rest of the forehead, specifically the top, and I made sure to cut the excess off. Moving down to the bottom, I cut a slim rectangle and I glued it to the edge, extending the top part. And the final touch I did to the top half of the mask was to rip out that annoying string off. I decided to take a break from doing the top part and work on the bottom. First thing I did was I patched up that gaping mouth. Next was his Giga Chad like chin. So I took a thick 1-inch piece of foam and I smacked it on there. And to bring it all together, I glued over a large piece of thin EVA foam. After the chin, I added more pieces to give levels of depth to the mask, specifically with the cheeks, because the grabber has these large wrinkles around his smile, which I wanted to replicate. Once the wrinkles and the chin were done, it was onto his ginormous nostrils, which I cut tiny pieces of EVA foam, specifically circles, and I glued it all on there. Now it was time to go back to the top part with his bushy eyebrows, which I cut into an angular shape. And I figured that was done with all the EVA foam, and now it was on to his horns. To switch things up, I went with the pink insulation foam, and I cut out the initial piece onto some paper. With the paper, I was able to outline the shape I wanted, and I cut 2 big pieces out. I took a big X-Acto knife and I cut the horns down to make appear less blocky. And when using a large knife, make sure to be careful when cutting. I learned this the hard way. After cutting them, I realized the horns were a bit too short, so I upgraded them by adding a simple extension. Taking hot glue, I smushed each pieces together. And I applied both horns to the mask, and it looked great so far. However, I made a huge mess. Luckily for us, I had a vacuum. So I scooped up all the trash because I'm a neat freak. And once that was all said and done, it was time to rip out the iconic and famous Quickseal. So when applying Quickseal, I wore some latex gloves and I smothered the Quickseal all over, making sure to fill in all the cracks and crevices to make the mask more smooth. I started with the first layer, and then I let it dry. Soon enough, I came back and applied a second layer, just for good measure. And a thing I forgot to add was his big teethy smile, which I quickly put on there. Now the Quickseal only did half of the smoothing job. The other half of it, I went outside to my garage and I sanded with the Dremel. I started by shaping his teeth. I then went on to sand the rest of the mask.
Doing the quick seal before the Dremel is something I recommend, since with the Dremel you can make any last minute smoothing and sanding in some areas. And with the quick seal already on there, all the gaps are filled in, so you don't need to worry about filling them in afterwards you're done dremeling. So I definitely recommend those steps in that order. And to top it all off, I took some sandpaper and I rubbed it all over the mask. Also, when you're sanding or dremeling, make sure to wear some gloves, a respirator, or a mask, as well as some eye protection, since all those particles you don't want in your mouth, your eyes, or your body. And once it was all done with the dremeling, it was time to apply the Plasti Dip. This time it was a blue Plasti Dip instead of a clear Plasti Dip, which surprised me, but it worked nonetheless. I did about a good amount of layers on it, and then it was on to the painting. I used the same paint I used for my king head. I painted it all over with a simple brush, and I let the first layer dry. Then I went over it with the second layer, which brought it all together, gave it a nice base coat. Now I wanted to give it some grunge and dirty it up a bit, and I took some brown paint, added a little bit of water to make it more liquidy. This is a technique that most mask makers use on YouTube that I've seen, where they take some paint and they make it more liquidy, and they would first paint it on, and then they would dab away the excess to give it that nice balance of grunge. And the second step is to take some white paint and dab away any of the areas that I thought were a bit too grungy to make the dirtiness more subtle, and I think it brought a nice balance to the mask. Then the final touch was taking some gray paint and highlighting some of the areas, especially the lips as well as the wrinkles, and once that was done, it looked good. And the final step to painting was to clean up the ginormous mess I made. After that was done, it was time to move on to the leather straps to the back of his head, and I went to the one and only Joann Fabrics and I bought some leather. Made sure to cut about 2 inches down so that when I fold it, it would be 1 inch, which I found to be the rough estimate size of the straps. I ran hot glue up and down the 2-inch strap, and then I would fold it over to the other side, creating the 1-inch strap. I continued this process throughout the entire strap of leather. And when it came to the buckles, I found these tiny ones that fit really well, and I found them at, you guessed it, Joann Fabrics. I fed the strap through the buckle and hot glued the end of it. Once the buckle was sealed, it was time to glue the end of the strap to the mask itself. I glued 2 straps on either side, making sure that they were the correct length to go around the head. To add even more detail to the mask, I took the metal buttons from my Myers cosplay and I glued them onto the edge of the mask. And it all came together when the strap was wrapped around the buckle, and it was a perfect fit. And I did the same process of gluing 2 straps to the bottom as I did to the top, which made the mask look far more realistic. And once the straps were on, I concluded the mask. Done.
Would you like to see a magic trick?
Excuse me. And that was the grabber mask all completed. I used EVA foam, hot glue, insulation foam, a couple coats of Plasti Dip, a buttload of quick seal, a roll of leather, metal buttons, and acrylic paint. I am mostly happy with how it came out. Could have gone a lot worse, but I'm thankful with what it turned out to be. Hope you guys enjoyed watching my process. Feel free to ask me any questions you have about what I used or how I did something. I hope this video inspires you all if you want to make your own grabber mask.
Hope this video was helpful. God bless you all. And always remember to create and craft.